finally, we have fallacies of structure. Fallacies of structure are logical fallacies that deal with some aspect of an argument's structure. Right? This isn't the same as the fallacies of argument, because the fallacies of argument um, are automatically invalid or unsound. Right? They completely destroy the very notion of having of presenting or having an argument, right? Whereas the fallacies of structure, right, have to do with undermining an existing argument in some way, shape, or form, right? The fallacies of structure, your argument itself can still be valid or sound outside the context of these problems with the structure, right? If you fix these, it's quite possible that your argument still is sound. What you've done, however, is you've muddled the argument, right? Or the structure of the argument's presentation is flawed, right? Not necessarily the argument itself, but its presentation. Although it's quite possible that in all likelihood, the argument itself as a whole is flawed if you commit one or more of these in critical places or in multiple places, right? So some fallacies of structure, again, changing meaning, um, dubious authority, straw man, appeal to emotion, and appeal to force, right? So in the case of changing meaning, um, it is always a fallacy of structure, right? But it is not always a fallacy of avoidance, right? What makes it a fallacy of avoidance is if the change of meaning is intentional. Sometimes we just slip, right? When we're making an argument, we use a term in one particular way for a while, and then uh, at some point during the course of making an argument, our understanding or our thinking, how we think of the term, changes slightly, or shifts slightly, and we start using it in that way for a separate line of argument, for a new line of argumentation, right? Thus using the term in two different ways and leaving it unconnected, leaving them unconnected, right? So if it is incidental, right, if it is merely a fallacy of structure, uh, then that's something that can be fixed, right? By either introducing a new term in place of where you switch the other one around, or by being more rigorous, right, and changing your argument slightly. The fallacy of dubious authority is the case of citing citing as an authoritative source someone or something who is either questionably or outright not an appropriate authority, not qualified to speak on this matter. Right? For example, relying on Neil deGrasse Tyson to tell you whether philosophy is valuable. A lot of scientists have thoughts on the value of philosophy and think it's just bunk. Right? Uh, Seriously, I screw Tyson. Tyson. Additionally, like relying on Susan from your from a church who has no medical experience or whatever to inform you about like why you shouldn't get your kids vaccinated because they cause autism. That's its own bag can of worms. The doctor who first put that out like was widely discredited after the fact, in case you weren't aware of that. And like he came out as having falsified his data and whatnot. Right. Um, so yeah, dubious authority, relying on religious leaders for how public policy on health matters should be, on health matters, and relying on, politicians to make educational policy when they've never, stepped foot on the administrative side of education, right? Uh, so if you let others, if you cite as a source someone who's unqualified for making a choice or for talking on a topic, then you've cited a dubious authority. Straw man is the next fallacy, and a straw man argument occurs when you weaken an opponent's position by exaggerating it in some way, right? That makes it appear absurd, right? Or inflating the argument, right? And then attacking the inflated argument rather than the argument that your opponent actually makes, right? Um, this is another favorite of politicians. They love exaggerating the points that their opponents make to make them sound even more absurd, um, and then attacking those points, right? So it's like setting up a scarecrow for everyone else to flock to, so that they ignore the real issue. Next, we have appeal to emotion. Right? Now, appeal to emotion should be qualified as a fallacy, um, because while in some cases emotions do have a place in an argument, right? Such as like the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Um, the emotion of like righteous indignation and everything. That's appropriate because you're dealing with lived circumstances there. You can't fully divorce emotion in that case. And it's the emotional response is an appropriate one to the injustices being doled out, right? So an argument backed by that um, is fine. An argument that relies on emotion or that seeks to manipulate emotions um, and has no grounding in fact or reality, um, or doesn't ground itself enough in the facts, right, is one that is structurally weak. Um, so the appeal to emotion fallacy occurs when when you, in your own argument, incite an emotional response in place of actually making an argument or a point for the connection between two things. Right? As an example, I shouldn't criticize your reasoning as students because it'll embarrass you or make you sad. No, no, no. That's an appeal to emotion for me to avoid my responsibilities. Um, I'm sure you'd like it, but it's better that you get the criticism on like your writing and your argumentation from someone so that you can correct it and suffer the minor embarrassment or dejected feelings so that you can come out of this course better than you were before. Uh, the last one, appeal to force, that's another favorite of the parent, right? Using intimidation tactics to persuade another rather than reason. It's also a favorite of um, law enforcement too, right? Um, so you shouldn't criticize me as a professor because I'll fail you if you do, right? I'm not saying I will, but that was an example. Or clean your room or get the chancla, right? I'll whack you with the slipper. Um, that kind of thing. Boy, you better listen. If you've heard that, your parents have heard, or if you've heard that, your parents have used appeal to force on you, and you may be liable for compensation. Okay,